Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people's story. After years of saving every penny and living in cramped apartments, I finally had enough for a down payment on a small house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. The house itself was nothing fancy, but what sold me was the massive oak tree in the side yard. This thing had to be over 100 years old with branches that created the perfect natural canopy. I could already picture myself reading under that tree on weekends. The whole process took forever, but closing day finally arrived. I'm a freelance engineer, so I'm pretty detail-oriented about paperwork and documentation. I had copies of everything: deed, survey maps, inspection reports, you name it. The previous owner was an elderly man who seemed relieved to be moving to a retirement community. During our final walkthrough, he mentioned something about the neighbor using the side yard sometimes, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Moving day started out perfect. It was one of those crisp fall mornings where everything feels possible. The moving truck arrived right on schedule, and my friends showed up to help. We were making good progress when she appeared. I was directing the movers when this woman marched up to me like she owned the place. She was maybe in her 50s, wearing what looked like expensive workout clothes and carrying a clipboard like it was a weapon. No introduction, no welcome to the neighborhood, just straight into attack mode. She informed me that the moving truck was an eyesore and the noise level was unacceptable. Then she pointed toward my beautiful oak tree and declared that the entire side yard was HOA common property. She said the fence marked the property line and the previous owner understood this perfectly well. She made it clear that my movers were not to set foot in that area. I was exhausted and just wanted to get through the day without drama, so I nodded and said I understood. But something about her tone bothered me. I made a mental note to check the official survey I'd received at closing. Things went downhill fast from there. Later that afternoon, my friend Mike was trying to help by moving some of the more fragile boxes into the shade under the oak tree. It was getting hot, and we were worried about my glassware melting in the direct sun. The woman burst out of the house next door like she'd been watching us through the window. She started screaming about trespassers and actually put her hands on one of my boxes, saying she was confiscating it as abandoned property on HOA grounds. I rushed over and told her to take her hands off my property. That's when she really lost it. She informed me that she was the HOA president and the neighborhood authority. She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures, saying she was documenting my violations. When I told her to get off my property, she laughed and said she wasn't on my property. She was on HOA property, and so was I. That evening, I unpacked my closing documents and pulled out the official survey map. Just as I suspected, something was off. The map clearly showed my property line extending about 15 feet beyond that old chain-link fence. The entire side yard and the oak tree were definitely mine. There was even a marker for an iron survey pin somewhere in the ground. The next morning, I found that survey pin hidden under an overgrown bush. Now I had undeniable proof of where my property actually ended. I decided to do some yard work. I fired up my new lawnmower and started cutting the grass, including the disputed section under the oak tree. I figured if this woman wanted to make an issue of it, we might as well settle it once and for all. She went absolutely ballistic. She came running out of her house screaming that I was destroying HOA property. She actually called 911 and reported a hostile neighbor trespassing and vandalizing community land. I couldn't believe she was calling the police over me mowing what I was pretty sure was my own lawn. 2 officers showed up about 20 minutes later. The woman put on quite a performance, acting like the calm, rational HOA president dealing with some crazy newcomer who was destroying community property. She had her clipboard out and everything, pointing to the fence and explaining how I was clearly in the wrong. Initially, the cops seemed inclined to believe her. She had that authoritative way of speaking that made her sound official. They asked me to step away from the area while they sorted things out. I stayed completely calm and told them that I was the legal owner of this land and that this woman was actually trespassing on my property to harass me. I said I could prove it and went inside to get my paperwork. I came back out with the deed and the official survey map and walked the officers over to the survey pin I'd found. I showed them how the property line was marked and explained that according to the official documentation, she was standing on my land while yelling at me for mowing my own grass. The officers' whole demeanor changed when they saw the survey map and the physical marker. They examined the documents, confirmed they were legitimate, and then informed the woman that she was mistaken about the property boundaries. They officially warned her to stop harassing me and to stay off my property, or she could face charges herself. She was left standing there sputtering in what looked like humiliated rage. I think this was probably the first time anyone had ever challenged her authority in the neighborhood, but I knew this wasn't over. Someone like that doesn't just back down when they're proven wrong. I needed to be strategic about this. The very next week, I hired a professional survey company to come out and officially flag my entire property line with bright orange markers. I wanted there to be no question about where my land began and ended. The following day, a fencing company showed up to install a tall privacy fence along the exact legally marked boundary. The fence was beautiful. Solid wood, about 6 feet high, and it perfectly enclosed the oak tree in my yard. I could hear the installation crew confirming the legal markings as they worked. When they were done, the woman's view into what she thought was her territory was completely blocked. Next, I requested a copy of the HOA covenants and bylaws, all 150 pages of them. I read through every single rule and regulation, highlighting anything that might be relevant. Then I took a walk around the neighborhood with my camera. Turns out the self-appointed HOA enforcer was violating quite a few rules herself. Her little dog was frequently running around off-leash, which was specifically prohibited. She had 2 pink flamingo decorations in her flower bed that weren't on the approved lawn ornament list. Her garbage bins were left on the curb for days after pickup instead of being stored out of sight. And she had a small political sign in her window that violated the signage guidelines. I documented everything with dated photos and videos. If she wanted to play the rules game, I was going to make sure we were all playing by the same rules. I also did some research on county property records and found out that she didn't even own the house she was living in. She was a renter. That gave me another angle to work with. I spent the next day drafting a very professional, legally sound letter. I sent it via certified mail to the HOA management company, all the board members I could identify, and the woman's landlord. The letter laid out everything that had happened: the harassment campaign, the false police report she filed, the clear evidence of the actual property line, and a detailed list of all her own bylaw violations with photographic evidence. I concluded by stating that her actions had created a hostile living environment and that I would explore all legal options if the harassment didn't stop immediately. Those certified letters created quite a stir. The HOA board suddenly had irrefutable evidence that their president was not only harassing a homeowner over property she didn't understand, but was also violating multiple community rules herself. The landlord was not happy at all. He started receiving official violation notices and fines from the HOA because of his tenants' infractions. Most rental lease agreements have clauses about following community rules and not causing trouble for the property owner. Within a week, the landlord issued her a formal notice to cure or quit. He demanded she remove the flamingo decorations, keep her dog leashed, and cease all contact with me. The notice gave her 30 days to comply or face eviction proceedings. Of course, she couldn't leave well enough alone. Instead of fixing her violations and apologizing, she doubled down. She started filing petty complaints against me with the HOA, claiming my fence was too tall, that I was parking incorrectly, that my outdoor lights were too bright. Basically anything she could think of to cause me trouble. But the HOA board was now aware of the situation and had documentation of her pattern of harassment. Every single one of her complaints was immediately dismissed. They'd had enough of her antics and were probably worried about liability if I decided to sue. When the 30-day notice period expired and she hadn't complied with any of the requirements, the landlord followed through. He hired a lawyer and began formal eviction proceedings for breach of lease terms. I found out about the eviction notice through the neighborhood grapevine. Apparently, she'd tried to rally support from other residents, claiming I was some kind of troublemaker who was destroying the community. But it backfired completely. Several neighbors came forward to say they'd had their own problems with her over the years, but had been too intimidated to speak up. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted to remove her as president. They installed an interim president who actually seemed reasonable and focused on legitimate community issues rather than power trips. The whole eviction process took about 2 months. During that time, things were blissfully quiet. She seemed to realize that continuing to harass me would only make her legal situation worse. 2 months later, I was finally able to enjoy the space I'd bought. I'd set up a hammock under the oak tree and was reading a book in the afternoon shade when I heard the rumble of a moving truck. I looked up to see the truck parked in front of her house. She was carrying boxes out to a smaller rental truck, looking defeated and angry. A few neighbors had come out to watch, though none of them seemed particularly sad to see her go. She caught sight of me in my hammock and shot me one final hateful glare. I didn't engage. I just raised my glass of iced tea in a small, polite acknowledgement and went back to my book. As her car disappeared around the corner for the last time, I reflected on the whole situation. I never wanted a fight. I just wanted to enjoy my first home in peace. But when someone pushes you into a corner, sometimes you have to push back with everything you've got. The ironic thing is that by standing up to her, I didn't just solve my own problem. Several neighbors thanked me afterward for getting rid of someone who had been making their lives miserable for years. The new HOA leadership actually focuses on legitimate community concerns instead of petty power games. I learned that knowing the rules better than the people who enforce them is incredibly powerful. Documentation trumps bluster every time. And sometimes the best way to teach someone a lesson is to let the system they're trying to abuse work against them instead. The oak tree is still there, of course, now safely enclosed in my properly fenced yard. I spend most evenings out there when the weather's nice, reading or just enjoying the quiet. It's exactly what I pictured when I bought the place. The house next door has new tenants now, a young couple with a baby who seem perfectly normal and neighborly. They wave when they see me and keep to themselves otherwise. It's amazing how peaceful things can be when everyone respects basic boundaries. Sometimes I wonder if she learned anything from the experience, but honestly, I don't really care. My part in that drama is over. I got my peace and quiet, she got what she deserved, and the neighborhood is better off without her reign of terror. The whole thing taught me that standing your ground doesn't make you the aggressor. When someone repeatedly violates your rights and refuses to listen to reason, sometimes the only language they understand is consequences. And in this case, those consequences came in the form of an eviction notice and a very public loss of the authority she'd been abusing for years. Update. 6 months later. I can't believe it's been half a year since I posted this story. So many people asked for updates that I figured I should share what's happened since then. First off, the neighborhood has been absolutely peaceful. The new tenants next door are fantastic. They're a young couple with a toddler who actually appreciate having the big oak tree nearby because it provides shade for their kids' play area. We've become friendly neighbors who help each other out with small things like accepting packages and keeping an eye on each other's places when someone's out of town. The HOA situation has improved dramatically. The interim president I mentioned turned out to be exactly what the community needed. She's a retired teacher who actually focuses on legitimate issues like maintaining common areas and organizing community events instead of harassing residents over petty violations. They even organized a neighborhood barbecue in the spring that was actually fun instead of feeling like some kind of compliance inspection. But here's where things get really interesting. About 3 months ago, I got a call from a lawyer representing someone who wanted to remain anonymous. Turns out several other people in the area had similar experiences with the former president over the years, and they were considering a class action lawsuit against her for harassment and abuse of her HOA position. The lawyer explained that my documentation and the police report from the incident had helped establish a pattern of behavior that went way beyond just my situation. Apparently, she'd been filing false reports and making people's lives miserable for years, but most folks were too intimidated to fight back or didn't know they had legal options. I decided to join the lawsuit. We ended up with 8 different households who had documented incidents of harassment, threats, false police reports, and abuse of HOA authority. The evidence was overwhelming. This woman had been running the neighborhood like her personal kingdom for almost 5 years. The case was settled out of court last month. I can't share all the details because of the settlement agreement, but let's just say it was significant enough that she won't be able to afford moving back to this area anytime soon. Part of the settlement also included her agreeing to never seek any position of authority in any HOA or community organization again. But wait, there's more. Remember how I mentioned she was a renter? Well, it turns out she'd been telling people she owned that house for years. The landlord found out about her lies during the eviction process and discovered she'd also been subletting rooms without permission and pocketing the extra rent money. He ended up taking her to court for fraud and lease violations. The cherry on top came when the county tax assessor's office contacted me a few weeks ago. Apparently, my property survey and the documentation from our dispute helped them discover that several properties in the neighborhood had incorrect tax assessments due to confusion about property lines. My taxes actually went down because they'd been overassessing my lot size, and I got a refund check for 3 years of overpayment. The oak tree is doing great, by the way. I had an arborist come out to check on it since it's so old, and he said it's healthy and should be around for many more decades. I've added some native plants around the base and installed some solar lights for evening reading. Oh, and I found out what happened to her after she moved out. One of my friends works in real estate and said she tried to rent several places in the area but kept getting rejected when landlords called her previous landlord for references. She eventually had to move about 2 hours away to find someone willing to rent to her. The best part is that the whole experience taught me a lot about property rights and HOA law. I've actually helped a couple other people in neighboring communities who were dealing with similar situations. Turns out there are a lot of little tyrants out there who think a clipboard and an attitude give them more authority than they actually have. I still get messages from people who read my original post asking for advice on dealing with HOA bullies. My standard response is always the same. Document everything, know your rights, don't let anyone intimidate you, and remember that bullies usually fold when someone stands up to them with facts and proper legal backing. The house has turned out to be everything I hoped for and more. I've made some improvements over the past 6 months, added a small garden area near the fence, upgraded the outdoor lighting, and even built a little fire pit area where I can sit in the evenings. The privacy fence has been perfect. No unwanted visitors, no harassment, just peaceful enjoyment of my own property. Sometimes I still can't believe how crazy that whole situation was. Looking back, I'm grateful it happened because it taught me not to let people walk all over me just to avoid conflict. Standing up for yourself isn't being difficult, it's being responsible. The neighborhood kids love playing around the oak tree now. With the former president gone, parents actually let their kids enjoy the common areas and outdoor spaces without worrying about getting screamed at for minor infractions. It's become the kind of community where people actually want to live instead of feeling like they're walking on eggshells all the time. I'm planning to stay in this house for a long time. It really has become the peaceful retreat I was looking for when I bought it. And every time I sit under that oak tree with a good book and a cold drink, I remember that sometimes fighting for what's right is worth all the temporary stress and drama. For anyone dealing with a similar situation, don't give up. Know your rights, document everything, and don't let anyone convince you that avoiding conflict is more important than protecting your property and peace of mind. Sometimes the only way to get bullies to stop is to show them you're not going to be their next victim. The whole experience cost me some money in legal fees and fencing, but it was worth every penny for the peace and quiet I have now. Plus, knowing that other people were helped by my willingness to fight back makes it feel like the right thing to do, and that, as they say, is how you turn a nightmare neighbor situation into a victory for everyone involved. Sometimes justice takes a while, but it usually finds its way to the people who deserve it most. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Trigger warning for self-harm. I was in the Navy and stationed on the submarine base in Connecticut. I had a friend I met in boot camp, and we were in the same class for our A school, Navy job training. We'll call that friend Bill. Now, Bill wasn't the most physically fit guy. He was short, kind of chubby, and wore glasses. However, Bill was really smart, and as the sonar technician he was meant to be, he would have been amazing. He had a pragmatic way of looking at things I really valued in a friend, and I know it would have made him successful if he had made it out to the fleet. While in school, we had a couple of petty officers that were hard asses. They somehow convinced themselves they were super soldiers despite the fact that our jobs in that field are really nerd-centric. You get picked for that job because of your math and computer skills, not your deadlift number. Still, they were both all about being fit and working out all the time. We would do physical training 3 times a week, and while most of us could keep up, Bill often fell behind on runs or didn't quite meet what these two idiots believed to be the standard. To be clear, Bill did pass the minimum requirements for fitness. He just didn't go as extreme as these guys. Side note for other Navy vets, he got the MC Peon coin for how hard he pushed himself at PT the day he visited. The end result was that they would constantly berate and belittle Bill. They'd call him fat, lazy, and everything else. They'd tell him he should kill himself. You name it. They were always on his ass, despite him passing his assessments. At some point, Bill pushed himself too hard and injured his knee. He told these petty officers he was injured and had been seen by the doc on base. The doc had put him on light duty so the knee could recover. He had the paperwork to back it up. They elected to ignore that and threaten him with kicking him out if he didn't do the workouts, so Bill kept pushing himself, injuring himself more, and his mental health degraded the whole time. In my time in the Navy, you didn't get mental health services really. The only person to talk to like that was the chaplain. For those who don't know, the chaplain is the religious leader, usually a pastor/priest/rabbi that is signed up as a commissioned officer. Our chaplain was the sweetest little woman you ever met, but as a chaplain, she held the rank of captain, high-ranking officer. So Bill set up a meeting with the chaplain to talk about things. When Bill informed the petty officers he would be missing class the next day for his chaplain meeting, they yelled at and berated him more. They called him a pussy, useless, not fit for the Navy, and everything else you can imagine. They convinced Bill he was being weak and the chaplain wouldn't care about his issues, that nobody would care. They promised to make life even harder if he didn't show the next day, so he canceled his meeting. Evidently, bad luck hit, and that night his girlfriend was also breaking it off with him. She wasn't worth his time or money, but he couldn't see that. That night, I awoke to a 3 a.m. call from Bill. I couldn't hear anything, and I asked several times, "Bill, you there? Are you okay?" It wouldn't have been the first time that I got a drunk dial from one of my friends after a hard day like Bill had. Sailors have been known to drown their sorrows a bit. Eventually, I figured it was a butt dial/drunk dial and hung up and went back to bed. I still regret that decision. The next day, all hell broke loose. Me and a couple other friends got calls from Bill's now ex-girlfriend informing us he was in the hospital because he slit his own throat. Turned out a few of us got that 3 a.m. call, but Bill couldn't speak at the time and was kind of out of it due to blood loss. We finished what we had to do on base and rushed over to the hospital. As we got there, the chaplain was on her way out and we passed her in the hallway. She spoke to us briefly to say that Bill would be okay and she wouldn't forget this. I have never seen a look on someone's face that so accurately depicted raw, unfiltered rage. It took us all by surprise because she was such a small, sweet, and personable lady. But the look in her eyes, you could just tell she wanted someone to pay for this. She wanted revenge. And we all knew she wore the kind of rank that could get it done. We visited Bill, who could barely talk, but he told us the story of what had happened, what he was thinking at the time, and how glad he was it didn't work. Apparently, it was cold enough that the blood clotted on the outside of his neck and made a kind of patch that kept him alive long enough for the EMS to find him and get him to a hospital. The doctor said he missed his carotid by about 1 millimeter. A week went by and we hadn't heard anything until we got called in by the chief of the training command, the boss to these petty officers. He said he wanted to check on the rest of us and make sure there weren't any other issues with these guys he wasn't aware of and that we were all okay. I let him know about an ass chewing he gave me a few months back that I was really set up by these guys and they had lied to him. My friends cited a couple other examples of their own with these guys being generally crappy, dishonest people. I don't think it mattered. I think their fates were already sealed and we were being asked for more ammo to bury them with. The next day, they were nowhere to be found and we were introduced to new instructors who would be taking over our training permanently. After class, I decided to stop by and ask the chaplain what happened. She told me she had never been more disgusted by the actions of a sailor than these two guys who convinced someone not to come see her. She teared up a bit, regretting that she didn't get the chance to help Bill before he made his attempt. In her mind, it was these two that precipitated and enabled Bill's attempt. So, on to the revenge. The chaplain told me she went to the admiral in charge of the entire base and demanded their immediate discharge. He granted it. Both petty officers were immediately processed out with dishonorable discharges. I can't remember the exact charge I heard they cited for it, but I know the Navy has a way of selling BS on paper when they want a certain outcome, especially officers at that high level. So basically they get no VA benefits of any kind, got kicked out of the base housing they lived in, and could probably only find work at a gas station or under the table stuff somewhere. Also, I know from someone else who got the boot that the Navy only pays for a single bus ticket to get you back home, not your family or any of your belongings. When you have a discharge like that, no company with DoD contracts is allowed to hire you. That includes McDonald's because they have stores on bases throughout the country. Taco Bell, Subway, etc. None of them will give you a job. They can't, and they don't want to anyway. So, I don't know where these guys went or what become of them, but I know their lives were irrevocably ruined. One of them had about 18 years in, so he was 2 years from retirement and lost it all. The other was at about 12 years, so he also lost a lot. Wherever they are now, I'd be very surprised to hear they're making more than minimum wage. As for Bill, well, he made a full recovery, he got a full medical discharge, which is an honorable discharge that meant E5 pay for the rest of his life, full benefits, and a referral to a counselor in his home state once he got back there, all paid for by the Navy. We lost touch over the years, but I did see on Facebook he got himself together, became a police officer, and got married. The next one is a malicious compliance story. First time posting a story here, so hopefully I don't break any rules. At my previous employer, I had to attend a lot of meetings around town and also go to a few events out of county. When I started, they had a pretty flexible policy where you could accept a monthly allowance of about $40 to cover your mileage. Or, if you were taking a lot of trips, you could submit expense reports and get the standard IRS allowable mileage reimbursement. I hate expense reports, so most of the time just took the $40 and called it even, despite the possibility that I might have made a few extra dollars by doing the longer expense report. New HR manager is hired, and she decided it would save a bunch of money if we cut out the monthly allowance for the sales team and made us file for expenses for every trip. Again, since I hate expense reports, I usually just ate the cost and only filed for trips where I would receive $20 or more. New HR lady notices that a lot of us are just donating the value of trips under $20-ish, so she figures maybe we'll start donating more if the expense report becomes more arduous. Her brilliant idea: require extra documentation like printing a Google Maps for each trip and adding extra details to each report. Mind you, this means she needed to hire an extra clerk to manage all this extra paperwork. But then she thought she'd be even more clever and start rejecting our reports if we didn't print a map for getting to the destination and a separate one for the return trip. Wow, okay, game on. I started using a very old map website like MapQuest, and I would create one for every trip, even the 3-mile round trip to one of our other offices just up the road. I saved a file for each of the regular visits so I could just pull them up and print one out. But even better, I didn't just print the page with the map, but the 5 or 6 pages each way that were filled with advertisements for gas stations, fast food, hotels, etc. By using these, I could submit a report for $3 reimbursement in seconds, but it meant printing about 15 pages each time. And yes, they ended up averaging more like $60 a month in reimbursement to me after that. And they added another part-timer to help sort and file all the paperwork. I'd like to say I outlived this idiot at the company, but sad to say she's still there, and still costing them tons of money and wasted time and resources, meanwhile killing the culture and any morale we ever created. But at least I made her life miserable. My parting gift was to share my MapQuest files with everyone on the sales team so they could bury her in paperwork. The next one is an entitled People Story, so I'm visiting an area of the country where bourbon is produced, and I'm at the airport on my way home. Stopped in a bourbon tasting room to get some decent food and get away from the crowd. Things are very pleasant for a while, and this older woman comes in and orders a sandwich for herself and some chicken tenders to go, and promptly spills water all over an entire section of the bourbon lounge. That's fine. All of us have spilled water all over at one point or another. The waitress is visibly frustrated, but calms herself down and starts cleaning up. About this time, 2 parents, 2 small children, and a baby in a large stroller arrive. The grandma tells everyone that because she's spilled at this table, they should all sit in the only nice leather couch and nice leather chairs section of the fancy lounge, somehow in spite of the fact that there are a couple and a woman by herself sitting there and there's only one couch free. They start to cram in and there's clearly no room for them, so the woman by herself volunteers to move. They take over her section and then fully surround the couple and the kids, who are completely out of control. Start grabbing things the couple is drinking and eating, with their parents protesting ineffectually. Chicken tenders are handed to the kids. They eat the tenders while flinging ketchup lids around. The mom orders hot water, which the waitress gets for her, and uses it to warm up the bottle of milk for the baby. They start talking to the couple, clearly interrupting their quiet time, and one of the kids grabs my mostly empty glass from my table and just goes off with it, which no one notices but me and the kid. The waitress tolerates the shenanigans for a little while until the mom orders another glass of hot water, and then she asks if they plan on actually ordering anything. They all sit in stunned silence for a second, and then the dad orders a drink. That's it. I just left, and I am just aghast. In addition to clearing off myself and the woman who was originally sitting there, that entire side of the lounge was emptying by the time I left. The waitress looked furious. She's losing tons of business for people who are asking for hot water and who ordered 1 drink, chicken fingers, and a sandwich for 6 people. It's a bourbon lounge. Just had to vent. Anyway, thank you for watching.